All right, welcome back to our live coverage of Jennifer Crumbley found guilty on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. I want to introduce you to some of our writers here at clickondetroit.com that have been bringing you the coverage these last couple of weeks. So right over here, Cassidy Johncox, and then also Derick Hutchinson. And so Cassidy's been writing a lot of the legal angles in this case, and Derick has been doing the minute-by-minute, essentially blogging of what's been going on in court every day. You guys hang there right here, because I want to go ahead and play when the verdict came in earlier on this afternoon to get you caught up if you're just joining us now at clickondetroit.com.
On count 1 of involuntary manslaughter as to Madison Baldwin, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. On count 2 of involuntary manslaughter in regards to Tate Muir, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. On count 3 as to involuntary manslaughter regarding Hannah St. Juliana, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And in count 4 of involuntary manslaughter against Justin Schilling, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
All right, so that's how it played out just a short time ago. And Cassidy, let me start with you. I mean, you have been looking at maybe some of the bigger picture items than in this case. And when we sit down to try to cover that, what were some of the things that you started to delve into? Because again, you know, we talk a lot, and because they actually, what you can't see from this vantage point is both Derick and Cassidy work on the other side of where the camera is right now. We would just be talking back and forth as we were watching.
So one of the biggest things that we are focusing on today is just how Jennifer Crumbley, so much of her argument centered on pointing the finger at her husband. And so we were really interested to see that, you know, she had said that he was solely responsible for the gun, for locking it up, for hiding it. And when asked why hide it, she said, well, that's just what you're supposed to do. So she was, you know, the last person to be seen with the gun, according to, you know, the evidence that the jury had seen in court.
Right, because she had gone to a shooting range with her son. And when we saw the Instagram posts, like, you know, shooting with my son's new Christmas present, that was the evidence that indeed he had possession of the gun and was shooting it, and with her.
Correct, yes. And so she said that she left the gun in the trunk of her car, and that her husband was the one who came home and took the gun from the car and put it in the house. She said that he was responsible for all gun handling. She didn't feel comfortable with the gun, and but she said she didn't see her husband put the gun away, and that she didn't know where the gun was hidden. So then at that point, you know, we know at some point the shooter accessed the gun, and from where. That's, you know, it's information that's something we just don't know. They do know that they found the case on the parents' bed that was empty, where the gun had been stored, and an empty box of bullets of ammunition on the bed as well.
Absolutely. And you know, when the police then went to their home and executed that search warrant just in the hours after the shooting that day, Derick, you've been the one who had been chronicling a lot of that evidence that was the exhibits that were put into evidence, and we talked about something like, what, about 400 exhibits is what the prosecution said at the beginning of the trial, that's what it might be.
And they kept adding more.
And they kept adding more. And so you were in the process of just disseminating that information minute by minute, really.
Yeah, the trickiest part was the timeline, because the prosecution didn't present evidence from chronologically.
Right.
It wasn't, this is what happened in March 2021, and then they bring you to the day of the shooting. A lot of it was jumping back and forth. That depends on witness availability and them sort of trying to hammer home certain points. So like with the search warrant, for example, it was presented before we knew the timeline of James Crumbley running home and searching and being like, oh, okay, the gun is gone. Right. So it was presented almost as if the gun case was left on the bed by the parents, and then you find out later that it was probably because he went home, realized the gun was gone. So you have to compile all the evidence in a way that makes sense with the story.
Yeah, and I think you made the point also earlier that being able for us to be able to actually then see it. It's one thing if you're watching and you're streaming the court case live, but then to be able to actually pull up the exhibits and see it in real time, it really connected a lot of people to the case too.
It's much more valuable to be able to watch a video that was shown in court. For example, the video of the parents backing their car into the parking spot when they were hiding or not hiding in Detroit. You can say, well, they backed their car into that parking spot, but the video shows them, James Crumbley, walking out, getting into the car, pulling it out of the parking spot to back it into the corner. So it paints a little bit different of a picture.
Yeah, and the deliberate nature of a lot of things. And I think of some of the videos and exhibits that were most compelling too was the day of the shooting when the parents were brought into the substation, when they went to the substation, and then they saw their son for the first time, and people being able to see that as well.
Yeah, jarring moment, right? Because you can imagine the emotion and the chaos of that moment, and then all of a sudden you see the video of them walking into the room, and there he is, you know, chained to the bar, and it's, you know, and then they start screaming, he starts screaming, I love you, and she starts screaming, why? And it's just like the emotions of that moment are just hitting you.
And And the jarring of a mother yelling why and the father yelling I love you, really interesting in this case. So Cassidy, what were some of the other big things? I mean, I loved reading, I mean, you talked about why the shooter himself did not testify. What were some of the other things that you were able to dig up on this?
Yeah, so we were talking a lot about the alleged flight of the parents, because we're not entirely sure. No one can say for sure whether the parents were actually fleeing from the charges against them, if they were in hiding, or if they were actually staying in Detroit out of their own safety, you know, as they feared the media and bad actors. So, you know, we were really looking into those text messages that were shared at, you know, in the 11th hour between the parents and the attorneys. And those privileged text messages, something very rarely in court, they were admitted at the last minute, and we were able to see that Jennifer Crumbley said she went to sleep at about 11 p.m. on December 3rd, 2021, you know, the night of their arrest, essentially. And but there were text messages sent to her attorney afterward. And
at 11:15.
Correct, yeah. But 11:15, 11:16, messages that were saying, we think we might have been found, we're laying low. So those are, you know, pretty concerning messages given the context. And Jennifer Crumbley, again, pointing the finger at her husband, saying, you know, those messages were on my phone, but we were sharing my phone at this point of the night. So I don't know that they were sent by me. And, you know, what other testimony can we hear from until we hear from James himself if he takes the stand at his own trial?
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the credibility factor, because there is so much that you would have to believe from Jennifer Crumbley, because the prosecution says this was a troubled kid who heard things, saw things were flying around the room, and she explained it as something totally different. It was a family joke. There was no hallucinations. We joked about a ghost in the house. And the prosecution saying, no, he told a friend that he had asked you and your husband for help to be taken to the doctor and that you laughed. And she said, no, that conversation never happened. So when you say, who do I believe in this case? And then all of a sudden the prosecution can come in and say, look, if you're catching her maybe in a lie here, what perhaps else is she not telling you?
Yeah, I think that definitely did help the prosecution's case. It was really interesting, and that was a deep dive we did on Click on Detroit, was the text messages between, you know, the shooter who was saying, I'm seeing ghosts, I'm hallucinating, you know, and the mother responding, but those were just jokes. Those were long-standing jokes with the family. Those are things that we've discussed and we know the parents fed into. But then there was the one text that the prosecution really pointed out was that, can you please just answer me, that the shooter sent to the mother. And so they were saying, you know, whether those were jokes or not, that kind of seems like something that, you know, you would want to respond to right away.
That you would respond with a laughing emoji, or you would respond in that kind of way. So
Sure.
Derick, you know, as we look at all of this and how you kind of just followed, you know, play, and you and I would be like, okay, wait, who's taking the stand right now? What were some of the most reactions, I think, from viewers who have been watching along with us?
Really, I mean, really split. I think we heard the foreperson say that both sides were well represented, and I think
was
that's
terribly interesting.
I think that's representative of how we all felt, because, you know, both sides presented a compelling case, and, you know, you said credibility. And I think that was so key, because the defense, they only called one witness. Jennifer Crumbley was the only person who testified on her behalf.
And she did not have to testify
so
on her
her
own
credibility
behalf,
was their entire case. And when she had those moments that she slipped up, where she said, we took his gun, you know, you just have to wonder if those were the moments that took away from that credibility. And then you hear from Justin Schilling's dad, and he talks about, we just wanted accountability, people to be held accountable. And if accountability was prioritized years ago, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And then you hear her say things like, it was my husband's job to deal with the guns. I was asleep as a 35-pound battering ram was slammed into the door next to the art studio. You know, the texts were just jokes. I just misspoke when I said it was his gun. It's just, they were asking the jury to believe a lot of things that she said. And so if her credibility wasn't 100% there, it was going to be a tough case.
Yeah, and the fact that he had access to that gun, and let's not forget what he drew on that math paper that so many parents, I think, were reacting to, that would send alarms and red flags all over the place. So, all right, Cassidy Johncox and Derick Hutchinson, thanks so much for all your hard work and kind of guiding us through all of this. And we'll continue to read as we continue to debrief this, because we know that there's going to be appeals. We know that there's a sentencing coming up on April 9th for Jennifer Crumbley, and we also know that James Crumbley will be going on trial on March 5th. We are going to be seeing and hearing a lot of the same same evidence over again in this case, as the prosecution has to say, this is the bad event that happened, this is who did it, and this is how he got the gun. We'll have to see that all over again. All right, but thanks so much. And thank you so much for joining us for our live streaming coverage here on Local 4 Plus of Jennifer Crumbley's trial. Make sure you stay with us for Local 4 News first at 4, and then Local 4 News at 5 and 6 o'clock tonight. We're going to break it all down for you. So for everyone here at Local 4 and streaming on Local 4 Plus, I'm Christy McDonald. Have a good afternoon, and we'll see you in just a bit.